Hello and a very warm welcome to Quadriga, and today we're focusing on the outcome of the eagerly awaited national election in the Netherlands, where incumbent Prime Minister Mark Rutte and his centre-right VVD party have scored a resounding victory, emerging by a good distance as the strongest force in Dutch politics. A long way behind, in second place, the populist far-right candidate, Geert Wilders. There he is. Many had feared that in the wake of Donald Trump's victory in the US and the Brexit vote in the UK, there would be a surge of support for Wilders' anti-Islam and anti-EU agenda. But it wasn't to be, and everybody is now asking what next for Europe, with crucial elections coming up, of course, in France and Germany. So our question here on Quadriga this week is, Dutch election, what does it mean for Europe? And to discuss that, I'm joined here in the studio by three seasoned analysts and observers. Let me introduce them to you, beginning with Janssen, who is a journalist from the Netherlands and an expert on right-wing populism. He says Wilders may have lost the election. His political agenda certainly didn't. Also with us is Alan Posener, author and commentator for the Berlin daily Die Welt. Alan says it seems the conflict with Turkey helped the Dutch government, and Angela Merkel will surely take note. And a warm welcome too goes to Rieke Havertz from Zeit online. Rieke says Mark Rutte's victory shows the strength of democracies, but Europe should not lean back and relax after the election in the Netherlands. First question goes, of course, to Job Janssen. A lot of anxiety before this vote around Europe. What's your assessment of the outcome?
Well, it's a surprising outcome. It was very uncertain until very short before the elections what would actually going to happen. We have a lot of voters who remained undecided until the end. So I was surprised that Mark Rutte won with these numbers, and Wilders lost with these numbers as well. But what I'm I think is most astonishing is that how the political landscape has fully fragmented into almost one issue, one target group parties, I think that's the development for me. It's the most important lesson we can pull from this election. This is also not only in the Netherlands going to happen, but probably in other party democracies, as we know in Europe. We were going to see this fragmentation. That was for me the biggest news yesterday.
You're suggesting that you're shocked by the outcome, but how shaken has Dutch society been by this election process?
No, I mean, I don't think so shaken. I think the Dutch people are generally quite sober when it comes to this. I'm also not really shocked. I'm a bit surprised that this happened. So no, I don't.
It's interesting that you're saying that, though, Job, because I mean, let's bring in Rieke. One quote that I heard time and time again during this election campaign was Dutch people saying, "I'm doing okay," referring to the economy and the boom mood in the economy. People have got jobs at the moment, but people were saying, "I'm doing okay, but I'm worried about the country." It seemed to me that Holland is very much a country in upheaval at this point in time.
Well, it seems to be that quote speaks to that. But what I found most surprising about this election as well is the high voter turnout we saw. I mean, over 80% of the people decided to cast a vote. And I think that is a very good sign for people to say, well, I might be okay, but I worry maybe about the country or things that are going to happen. And so I'm going to cast my vote and raise my voice. And they clearly spoke to, we want democracy to happen in this country. And I think that is a very, very good sign.
How do you read it, Alan, the outcome of the election and the process as a whole?
Well, I mean, it's definitely good. Firstly, high voter turnout. I mean, it gives the new government, whoever it forms it, legitimacy. Also the fact that normally high voter turnout does benefit fringe groups. Here, no, it benefited the centre, which is good. And I agree that in a way, Wilders still managed to set the agenda, the way the UKIP, although not represented in the British Parliament, managed to set the agenda in the question of Europe and so on, drive the Conservative Party to a referendum and to disaster ultimately. But OK, in a way, that's what populists are for, isn't it? It's to bring things that are simmering into the mainstream and to domesticate them. So this seems to be what's happening in Holland, and so generally speaking, I think it's a good outcome.
You're all talking as though this is a sort of a good outcome, all very rational. I'm surprised by the tone of some of the politicians who have been commenting on this today. We had Angela Merkel's chief of staff, Peter Altmaier, coming out and saying, "The Netherlands, oh, the Netherlands, you are a champion. Congratulations on this great result." Yeah, but doesn't this signify that there was a real sense of panic in advance of this vote among the leading figures in the European structures, as it were?
Yeah, that is quite obvious. A relief for many politicians, France, Donald Tusk, even everybody congratulating and breathing a second time. Like, okay, we managed this. So far, so good. But we didn't see a real solution to the rise of populism in the Netherlands. It was a little bit copy and paste from the other center-right parties, the left-wing parties. They mirrored themselves to Wilders. But so in that sense, he was still very much in the center of Dutch politics. This is going to take a while.
Where does this vote leave Geert Wilders?
Well, he's getting into a very isolated position after his attacks on the Dutch judges. He's calling it fake judges, fake parliament. It will mean that he is increasingly isolated. The man has almost no money and no funds. He has no volunteers that campaign for him. The only thing that is left for him is to radicalize even further and giving quotes on Twitter that about Muslims, but also probably about Europe. And it's the risk that through him, other parties also feel the necessity to further radicalize on these topics, and that's the real worrying thing, I think.
It's interesting that you talk about the process of radicalization, the temptation to radicalize, because Geert Wilders actually came out himself and said, after he had posted his own ballot, he said, "The genie will not go back into the bottle." Can you describe the genie?
Well, the genie is many people, in the last 20 years, I think, felt increasingly uncomfortable about the multicultural society, about the democratic deficit in Europe. And, when we made taboos out of these topics, the political, academic elites, Wilders is capitalizing this sentiment now. And he has a 2-0 advantage because he is the one who put it on the agenda and he's the one who is leading the discussions on this. So this genie is definitely not back in the bottle soon.
Is he a dangerous man for Europe, Geert Wilders, Alan?
Not anymore. No, I mean, the real danger for Europe now is in France. It's Marine Le Pen. And there's a danger lurking on the sidelines in Italy, by the way, where the five-star movement could yet come into government. So these are the things we need to worry about. But if Wilders had won, if he'd had the biggest party, he still wouldn't have been prime minister. But the point of the populist narrative is the people want us. We are the people. But they don't let us govern. They won't let us to the seats of power because they're scared. That's one thing the Netherlands have proved. They are not. Geert Wilders is not the people. He's, not even 20% of the people. So that's good. Right? So, and now we have to look at the other bits of Europe and prove there that they're a part of the people, but they're not the people.
And I think that's part of the relief we saw after this election, because everyone was eagerly watching the Netherlands saying, well, this is going to be the start of a populist spring. It starts in the Netherlands, then we move on to France, then we move on to Germany, maybe. And so I think that's part of the relief that we exactly saw. He is not the people, as you rightly put it. And I think it's the same kind of relief we felt after Van der Bellen won in Austria, because everybody feared after Trump, after the Brexit in Austria, there's going to be the beginning of all this populism spreading in Europe. And I think the Netherlands showed us there is a different way to it. But also, of course, Rutte, he wrote this open letter basically saying, well, you better fit in here or you need to leave, to everyone who's not Dutch. So, I mean, he kind of copied him in a way. Absolutely. And he moved to the right of the center to kind of gain momentum. And I think part of this momentum also, of course, was his strong stand on Turkey and what he did just shortly before the election.
I'm glad you mentioned Turkey, because that's another aspect of the story that we haven't talked about quite yet. We've got some images here just to illustrate what's been going on. Let's have a look at those. There were serious clashes between riot police and hundreds of pro-Turkey protesters in the port city of Rotterdam at the weekend. This after Dutch authorities blocked Turkish ministers from staging rallies journeys designed to win the votes of expatriate Turks ahead of Turkey's constitutional referendum in April. Job, I have to ask you as a Dutchman, what is Turkey? What is Turkey doing getting involved in Dutch domestic policy and politics?
Why are they involved?
Yeah. I mean, that's what outsiders would be asking themselves, I'm sure. Our international audience thinking, what has Turkey got to do with Dutch domestic politics and this election?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, they have elections. They have the elections themselves, I guess. So I think Erdogan was deliberately looking for this conflict, and you know, and also in the Dutch situation when Mark Rutte was this perfect chance to show some authority, and it's exactly this authority what many of the right-wing populist voters really long for, and I think Mark Rutte felt it very well, and he used the situation, I think, very intelligently. So yeah.
You're nodding. Angela Merkel will have been looking on, you said in the comments at the top of the show.
Well,
I mean, just to give our viewers an idea of what kind of things Mr Erdogan has been saying, he called Mark Rutte's cabinet remnants of Nazism, but there was a lot of that kind of stuff. It's been flying. There's been those kind of insults and comments flying towards Germany as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've been sent myself on my Facebook page hundreds of caricatures which were posted in Turkish papers depicting Angela Merkel as Hitler with a swastika and so on. And just because, although Merkel had nothing to do with this, in some German cities they couldn't find a venue for Turkish politicians to stage rallies. Now, I think it's disgraceful what happened in Holland, quite frankly. Of course, Turkish politicians have a right to address people of Turkish nationality who have the right to vote.
And there are many in the Netherlands.
And there are many. And is it 2 million? I'm not quite sure. It's a lot of people. I mean, it's a vote that counts. So
400,000 Turkey.
400,000, and it's 2 million in Germany, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a vote that counts. And of course they have the right. And I think Erdogan was in a win-win situation here, because if he holds the rallies, then he's telling his people back home, look how powerful I am, they're listening to me in Europe. If it's forbidden, as happened in the Netherlands, then he says, look, they're all fascists and so on. So Erdogan was playing this game where he can't lose. Rutte used this, and Merkel was very low-key in comparison. I think maybe next time that, you know, she might react differently, having seen how that plays to the public. That's what I'm saying.
Rieke?
Well, I agree in parts. I don't agree that I think that it was really an intelligent move. The voter outcome might prove him right, but we don't know yet if his reaction to the Turkey situation got him all those undecided votes. But still, I kind of find it disgraceful for democracy to say, we stop this, you're not allowed to speak here, because I think democracy needs to allow itself to say, well, if you find a venue, if you want to speak to your voters in this country, we have free speech, and you should always play to free speech, and you should never forbid that. So I thought it was not a very smart move of Rutte. I don't think it was very intelligent, but of course now it proves him right for the moment, but we will see in months to come if that was a decisive thing for voters to give him the vote.
Yeah, of course, nobody is happy when you have to cancel political events. And you know, the Dutch government was willing to cooperate to organize campaign-like events also with Turkish politicians. So the response of Mark Rutte was mainly because of the events that happened quickly after each other, and the tone of voice and the way Turkey tried to do this in a way that you don't really do among friends in NATO. And I think that was it's not so much about the principle; it's more about the tone of voice and the way it went in the last few days that Rutte decided, no, we're not going to do this. Of course, also from a strategic point of view, but nobody's happy when you have to cancel political...
well, and he did a smart thing in the end, because he invited the Turkish Prime Minister for dinner, and he agreed, so he kind of like got around it, I think.
Yeah, and he shows himself to be a statesman again, of course.
I'd just like to go back a little bit after those insights to the state of the Dutch society at this point in time. The Netherlands always used to be a synonym for peace and harmony, but these days there are clearly lots of divisions within Dutch society. Here's one example.
Donny Bonsink has been campaigning for Geert Wilders. Donny wants the Netherlands to leave the EU. And he wants to stop the spread of Islam in his country. Donny is gay, and he claims that Muslims don't like gay people. He's concerned about that. There are no reliable statistics that indicate an increase in homophobic attacks by Muslims. Still, Donny says he wants to take back his country. A nationalist is someone who loves his country and the freedom that country provides. But a lot of Muslims don't like freedom. Donny believes that Geert Wilders is the only candidate who can preserve the Netherlands' liberal values and its open society. But can a right-wing populist like Wilders really meet those expectations?
Rieke, what do you say about that young gay man who says, I want my country back? He feels as though his freedoms are infringed by the Muslim population in the Netherlands.
Well, of course, we've seen that in many different ways and shapes, also in the United States in the elections, where Donald Trump appealed to those voices saying we need our country back, and he's the one who understands us, and he played with the fear of the unknown, and I think that's similar to that young man in this. We just saw that he probably is fearful of the unknown, but I don't think that populism or Geert Wilders will be an answer for that. And I think the Netherlands has always been a country where multiculturalism was like huge in play, and which always like was welcoming people. And I think most definitely the new government, whichever coalition will be formed, should stick to that. And I think the success of the Green Party, on the other hand, showed that there are a lot of voices who say we need to be welcoming and we need to address these issues, but not in a populist way, but in educating people about maybe Muslims believe different things, but they don't need necessarily to be against our freedoms.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Greens there, because the next quote I had was from the head of the Dutch Greens, Jesse Klaver, who says, I want my Netherlands back in the name of freedom and tolerance. Yeah. So he's coming from a completely different angle. Job.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think in this election we also saw that you know, putting yourself actively against the tone of right-wing populism can actually work. You know, ignoring never works. I think we have seen it in the first years in Belgium, especially with the cordon sanitaire of the Vlaams Belang in those days. And so I think Jesse Klaver, the leader of the Green Party, really understood that when he is radicalizing, there is also a potential, potential voters for an open, tolerant, globalized, liberal Netherlands. There is, and he showed that it worked, and he was positive. He had a positive tone, and he was optimistic. And so, I think that's the lesson we maybe can learn from this election. Don't ignore, but put something against it.
Mm. Alan, so we agreed, I think, at the beginning that Geert Wilders has had a major impact on the agenda of this election. To what extent are right-wing populist parties actually determining the agenda increasingly around Europe?
To a great extent. I mean, I think, like Anne said, if you ignore issues which are simmering, then they really become virulent. Then they bubble up. And there was sort of, you know, in polite society, you just didn't discuss about your uncomfortableness with a high percentage, shall we say, of immigrant kids in schools and what that does to the level of education and so on. And there's no reason why we shouldn't discuss it. It's obvious if you have an inner-city school and 90% of the pupils are of immigrant origin, come from, and it's also a social question, that it's going to do something to the level of school. Let's discuss it. Let's discuss what we can do about it. You don't have, you know, because if you don't, then it's going to take the poisonous form that Geert Wilders takes. Let's talk about radical mosques and what we can do about them. Because we don't, then it's going to be the Geert Wilders and AFD type. So I think, in a way, this is a good thing.
Rieke.
Yeah, I quite agree. I think you need to address issues that might not be comfortable, but democracy is not always about being comfortable or feeling within your own comfort zone, but you need to address these issues. I really quite agree and say, well, let's talk about it and just not sugarcoat everything and say we don't have a problem, because we see with Wilders, with Le Pen, with the AFD, that there are issues that a lot of people are concerned about, and we need to find answers that are not populist answers, but that are answers that a democracy can live with. And I think they're out there, but we need to discuss them.
Yeah, but because the fact that other parties ignored issues on the European Union or the multicultural society, all these right-wing populist parties in Western Europe, they own these topics. And you know, it's very difficult to as an established party now to get this discussion going in a right way. I would love to see left parties from an emancipation point of view to discuss the issues with multicultural society, because when we know that in parts of some minorities have some issues with homosexuals or with Jews, and that doesn't really help you get along in society as well. So that's definitely a thing you have to address, and it would have been so nice when left parties can also deal with these issues. And I missed it. And also the Greens, Klaver does it very good, but he also didn't really address these issues, and that's not good, I think.
OK, we've moved a little bit on to the European level from just the Netherlands, but there are 3 key European elections this year, of course. The Dutch elections that we've already talked about quite a bit, the French presidential race, and then the national elections here in Germany in September. So what does the Dutch election tell us about the 2 elections to come and what is called the domino theory? Let's have a very quick look.
3 politicians, 1 threat. When these right-wing populists, Frauke Petry, Geert Wilders and Marine Le Pen, closed ranks a few weeks ago in Germany, their message was clear. Brexit was just the beginning. Wilders hopes that the Netherlands will become the next domino to fall. He wants to pull his country out of the EU.
Make these people comfort again and return the Netherlands to them. And if we don't, that's why it's such a crucial and historic election, that if we don't, we will cease to exist.
In France, Marine Le Pen seems set to win the first round of the presidential vote. And Frauke Petry's Alternative for Germany party is likely to win seats in parliament for the first time. Are we really seeing a domino effect here? Will the right-wing populists be able to bring about the breakup of the EU?
Are we seeing a domino effect here, or has the tide been shored up a little bit by the result of the Dutch election?
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, it has also to do with very specific national characters. Of course, it influences each other, but it has to do also with how the national government is being perceived by a population. France deals with other issues than the Netherlands again. Of course, they look at each other, but I think media tend to see a domino effect. They like to see a domino effect. I'm not so sure about it, honestly.
I'd just like to quickly, though, talk about the genie out of the bottle. We talked about the genie out of the bottle in the Dutch context. What about in the European context? Could it be that the debate is shifting a little bit from being focused on traditional issues like jobs and security and moving more towards identity, questions, identity and culture and these kind of issues, Alan?
Well, the genius of Madame Le Pen is that she talks about both. She has a socialist writing her economic programme, and she talks about France's identity, and she brings that together. And if she became president of France, it would basically be the end of the European project, of the European Union. That's how important that election is. That was never the question in Holland. It's not the question in Germany. It is the question in France. Decisive.
What do you say, Rieke? Where's this going on the European level?
Well, I agree. It's hard to say because I think we all look very closely at every event, Austria, Netherlands, but you cannot tell from one to the other. And I think in France, Le Pen is much smarter. She has much more infrastructure. We saw Geert Wilders. He didn't even campaign really on the street. He only did like phone interviews. He did stuff on Twitter. Marine Le Pen is out there. So she has a totally different standpoint, and I think it would be very, very dangerous if she would become the president of France. And now, I mean, we only see Macron, who might be the one who can compete with her. And I mean, it's just we see how the parties deteriorate even in France. And I mean, we see what happens to Fillon, who's just like basically regarding his own scandal and is not even campaigning anymore, really, because he has to deal with all the scandals. So there's different issues in every country, and so I don't think we can say, oh, now we are on the safe side because Wilders didn't win the Netherlands election, so now we're quite sure everything will be fine in Europe. I don't think that's going to happen, so we have to be...
What about German voters on the popular side of the spectrum? Are they going to look at are they going to be encouraged, as they have been, by Brexit and Trump, or are they going to be discouraged by what they've seen here in the Netherlands, perhaps?
I don't know. For me, the most positive outcome for me, for Germany, would be that people see the high voter turnout and say, well, we have to stick to that. We have to get out and vote, whatever we vote, but we have to raise our voice and vote. And in the best outcome, of course, they wouldn't cast their vote for the AfD. But I think people that are leaning towards voting populist here in Germany are more regarding their own issue, their own like little garden, and saying, this is what concerns me. They're not looking to the Netherlands saying, oh, that sticks to me or that doesn't stick to me. I think it's just what they see for their own private life, what matters for them most.
Final quick word from you, Job Janssen. 30 seconds on what we've been talking about today to conclude.
You know, I've said also before, I think the Dutch elections, everybody was focused on Geert Wilders and what it meant for democracy. But what I have seen in this election campaign is a feast of democracy. Many good parties with good party leaders, a lot to choose from, high voter turnout. It was actually a feast of democracy.
We'll leave it there, a feast of democracy, an optimistic note in our discussion about the impact of the Dutch election on Europe. Thanks very much for joining us. I hope we've given you plenty of food for thought. Do come back next week. Bye-bye and tschüss.